When I listen to Doug Peterson talk, I hear him say everybody's done a nice job. If they've done a nice job, why have they only won 3 games? I'll talk about that in today's edition of Locked On Jaguars.
You are Locked On Jaguars, your daily Jacksonville Jaguars podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is your team every day here on Locked On Jaguars. We thank you for making us your first listen. I'm Tony Wiggins, the host of the Locked On Jaguars podcast, where you can find everywhere that you watch or listen to podcasts. Make sure you tap into that location to ensure that you do not miss an episode of the show. Today's show is sponsored and brought to you by FanDuel. That's right. It's the end of the year, man, but you can still get paid by going over to FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Shout out to the everydayers for joining us here on Locked On Jaguars, where we are every day. It is your team every day. All right, here's what we're going to discuss. If everyone's done a nice job, then why are they 3-11? Pretty simple, straightforward question. It just seems like every time I turn around, Doug Peterson is complimenting someone for doing a nice job. And maybe they have done a nice job. But the question is, for me, when do we ever see a win-loss column? It says WLT, win-loss tie. It doesn't say win-loss P, win-loss and progress. And that's where I want to stick right here. I want us to sit here and think about where this organization is right now. Not that Doug Peterson is incorrect for acknowledging people that have done a nice job. And to his credit, he was only answering questions specifically about people that he was asked about. Yesterday, it was Brian Thomas Jr. and Brenton Strange, two guys that we commented on last night as bright spots on our postcast. So I totally get it, and I totally understand that when you're asked a specific question about specific people, that you give accurate answers. It's just that every time Doug Peterson is asked about somebody, they've done a nice job. And why does progress feel like the thing that we're going for here? What does it mean? Does it mean that at this point, Doug Peterson knows that his job is probably not going to be his too much longer, and he just wants to see these guys make progression towards being productive players, having some of the things that they've taught them individually actually manifest itself? I don't know if people realize how difficult it is, but when you've done anything, and I assume that coaching players is the same thing, you develop rapport with guys, right? And we're all used to guys getting traded or getting cut or leaving, and that doesn't mean it makes it any easier on a coach when that happens, when he's looking at these guys and it's their livelihood. So there's a part of me that's invested in this, and that believes that Doug is invested in this beyond just saving himself. And that is a very good characteristic to have. I honestly think he wants the best for these young men. I really don't know a coach that has ever wanted to win, but at the same time did not want the best for his players individually. There may be times when a coach appears to put their survival and their ability to maintain their jobs and all of that stuff ahead of players. Or I have seen situations where we kind of thought, based on the way the players responded. Here, go back to 2018, where they were trying to force something that wasn't there yet. Like, these guys are out there trying to win. And it felt like to me back in the day that they were playing Taven Bryan over guys whose contracts were going to run out. And the dudes didn't like it very much. And they big argument and fights and all of that stuff. And this was between Yannick Ngakoue, Malik Jackson, or some of those other guys. Mainly, it was Yannick Ngakoue who went off about this practice of substituting in. Ironically, this was about substitutions back then too. Taven Bryan, who wasn't ready, but he was a rookie who was a first-round pick. And it did seem like at that time the staff was forcing him into the game when games were still in question. And this is in 2018. I remember this vividly. So sometimes that happens, but for the most part in the NFL, even though it means not for long for a lot of people. These coaches really do care about a lot of the folks, especially guys like Brenton Strange, who from all you hear, every day he just shows up and he does his job, even in preparation. And I will tell you this, he is one of the people that I was not very high on, who has definitely improved. And I can say this, and y'all go ahead and knock on wood. I'm about to say something. I can see what they saw in him when they picked him. I still don't think or believe that it should have been a second round pick. And for a team, and this is one of the things that we need to get into. The Jaguars at some point must not continue to draft guys for potential based on traits and potential and probabilities, and they have to start getting people, man, that they can onboard and they're ready to go. And I know you can't short-term everything, but what happens is when you take too many Brenton Strangers in the second round and they get to the end of their second year and they start finally showing promise, that's fine for a team that wins all the time because there's no rush anyway. It's like a guy in college told me once. A guy in college told me, a college coach / recruiter told me this. He said, he called me about a kid. The kid had never played football. The kid was a basketball player. Y'all bear with me. The kid's like 6'6", 230. But he was a power forward type. And we knew he wasn't going to make it in the NBA. So he said, I never played football, but I'll try. He was actually a kid from Africa. I called small school, right? It's not the, like, it wasn't from the power four, but it was a group of five type. He says, if I was still at that power four school, it wasn't power four back then, it was power five. He says, if I was still at that school, I'd have done it. I'd have told the coach, look at the potential. We could put him in the program. By the end of his second year, the beginning of his third year, he's a contributor. By his fourth year, they'll be like, where did y'all get this guy from? He says, I can't do that here, Wig. I can't do that. We need guys that can play right away. We don't have time to develop 15 guys. We need everybody contributing, right? We're not one of those bigger schools. So a winning organization can do exactly what I just said when they have a lot of great players. An organization that needs contributions can't do it. And I think this is where we get into it when we talk about how there's a difference between team building for a team that has a lot of established players, and there's a difference between the undertaking that you have to have when your team doesn't win a whole bunch. Now, granted, when the Jaguars took Brenton Strange, they had tight ends under contract. So they could have viewed themselves as a 9-win team, a playoff team they were the previous year, a 9-win playoff team, and they got a gut feeling about this guy, and then they go and take him. The thing is, they hadn't arrived yet, and they started acting like they did. And they did the same thing that offseason by not going into free agency and worrying more about infrastructure than anything else. And to me, you got to know who you are. You got to know where you are. There's no such thing as wins, losses, and progress when all y'all might get fired. But the Jaguars do have some young pieces, whether they're coaching here next year or whether somebody else is coaching here next year. They got some young, nice developmental parts that they'll be able to use moving forward. And Brenton Strange is one of them. And of course, Brian Thomas Jr. is the real deal. And we'll get on him in segment number 2 here on Locked On Jaguars in 1 second. Today's show is sponsored and brought to you by BetterHelp. BetterHelp is therapy for people who need it. Sometimes you don't know that you need it, but there are times during the holiday season and times like this where it makes you miss people, it makes you have memories, or if you're not feeling well, man, it'll really, really make you feel sad because these are happy times, but for people who are struggling, it's not so happy. If you're thinking about considering therapy, make sure you tap into BetterHelp. If you want to stay, whether it's about pain management, how to cope with pain management, how to deal with death in the family, how to deal with just time management, trying to make sure you can spend the time with your loved one that you need. If you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's online, entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Find comfort this December and this holiday season with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Y'all know what time it is, man. It is that time. That's right. College football. The playoff is back, and it's here. It's bigger than ever. And with the newly expanded 12-team format, it's guaranteed to be bigger and better than ever, bringing you all the hard-hitting and high-flying excitement that you love. TNT Sports coverage of the college football playoff begins December 21st, starting with the college football playoff kickoff show presented by AT&T at 11 a.m. Eastern. Leading into our first matchup, SMU, Southern Methodist. The Mustangs battling the Penn State Nittany Lions at noon. Then the Clemson Tigers look to upset the Texas Longhorns in a showdown at 4 p.m. Eastern. Don't miss a moment of the action. Watch the college football playoff presented by Allstate live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and Max. All right, running it down here on Locked On Jaguars, where it's your team every day. We thank you for making us your first listen once again. Talking about win, lose, and progress. I'm hearing a lot of positivity, talk about effort, talk about young guys developing. And, you know, it kind of gets me to start to feel like, okay, this sounds good and it feels good. And thank you for that, Doug, but you can't take up for the fact that they ain't winning, right? And I will say this again. I'll say this. I'll be specific. Doug Peterson is only answering questions that he's asked, right? But when you don't win, there aren't too many reasons and ways that you can keep going and telling people why you didn't win, right? I mean, everybody's watching it. You ain't win. Eventually, you're not good enough, right? And eventually, it's bad teams lose every week or for the majority of the time. Eventually, it just comes down to the bottom line, and I understand that. Two things can be true at once. Doug Peterson can be absolutely right about some of the young guys that are playing, but I want you to think about something before you start blaming all of this on just injuries and Trevor being out. And that is a big deal. Don't get me wrong. Trevor being out is a huge deal. But remember, they were losing before Trevor went out. You can get to the point where if you're not careful, and this isn't Doug Peterson, but this is people like me, this is where you start to look for small victories or silver linings when you're not winning. And it could come across as like if somebody just showed up here in Jacksonville or just showed up, they've been gone for the last 3 years, right? But they understand competitive football and they just say, okay, let me find out what's going on with Jacksonville. And then you hear the press conferences, which you never hear from the GM. You always hear from the coach. You hear the players. Everybody's trying. Everybody's playing hard. Everybody is complimentary of each other. They haven't put their head down. They're extremely entertaining to watch when the football isn't too bad. And you can say, man, look, they don't really have a culture problem. They just got a team problem. Or is it a coaching problem? Or is it a GM problem? See, we don't know what it is. But when I said I don't want to sit here and try to figure that out. I don't want to say, okay, that's it, and definitively talk about what it is. All I want to say is, okay, this isn't working. Let's just start completely over. It's real easy for me to do that because, see, last year they fired some coaches and they got worse. And one of the things one of those coaches were allegedly heard yelling or saying was, you're firing the help. You're letting go people that can help you. That couldn't, if that did occur, and that's allegedly now, but if that did occur, they were 100% correct. This team got worse. whoever it was, whether it was Doug Peterson, Trent Baalke, or Shad Khan, whoever it was, or whether it was a collective, or they didn't have any problem starting over after they went 9-8 2 straight years. So when you go the 3-11 now, I don't know where they're going to end up. I think they might win all the rest of the games. If they go 6-11, how could you now be slow to make changes when you were quick to make changes after they went 9-8 2 years in a row, or 9-8 1 year and 10-9 if you count the playoffs, so 19-17, and you were quick to pull the trigger on it, and then your team gets worse? That's not a good look for whoever it was to make those decisions to get rid of those people. And Doug Peterson, is what I've told everybody. If it was the offense, Doug Peterson wasn't going to fire himself, and he wasn't going to fire Press Taylor, who does everything at the approval of Doug Peterson, in conjunction with Doug Peterson in terms of game planning and direction all week long. He wasn't going to fire Phil Rauscher. They inevitably just felt like we needed to make a move. So now I wanted to make another move, but I wanted to go all the way, start it all over again. Because it sounds like if you just drop, like I said, if you drop somebody in the middle of Jacksonville who hasn't watched sports in 3 years, and they heard the press conferences where guys are talking about progress and people doing a nice job, I would just turn and look at their record and be like, oh, okay, they must be 8-5 or 8-6 or maybe 9-5 or something. No, they're 3-11. Those press conferences, and granted, now I'm gonna keep it real with you. He only answered questions that he was asked. But why was he asked those questions? Well, because the rest of it is obvious. The same people who ask those questions, and sometimes I'm one of them, but most of the time after the game, I'm not. The same people answer those questions, if you follow them on social media, they'll just say they're just a bad team. So they already know the answer. The fans already know the answer. So there's no reason to belabor that. But the point is this is where we have gotten. If you just got dropped in Jacksonville after 3 years of not paying any attention, you say, what's going on with the Jaguars? And then you hear it, you're like, they sound like somebody who just got the job and they're trying to rebuild the team. They sound like people who believe that in a year or this time next year, it'll be totally different because all of these young guys are going to grow up. They sound like people the kind of folks that'll tell you, just give us one more year, man. We're almost there. We're almost there. We almost got it. We think we figured it out. But you're 3-11. So you almost figured it out when you were 9-8 or when you were 10-9. You can't say you almost got it figured out when you're 3-11. And then you can't point to the fact that it's because Trevor got hurt, because you were losing games when Trevor wasn't hurt. So at some point, we have to realize this is us. This is where we are. We can't win games, can't win a division, have been knocked out of the chance to win anything that is significant. Now everybody's just wondering if they're going to actually win, or it's not really a win, it's a loss, if they're going to get the top pick in the draft. And then most people are saying it doesn't matter who we pick, they're going to screw it up anyway. They actually haven't screwed up their first round picks. So you're going to get a good player. It's just a matter of what does it matter? Because every time they keep adding something and thinking they have it, it gets worse. It's not the additions. It's not the changes in the coaching staff. At the end of this show, I'm going to tell you exactly what it is. And I keep trying to tell people, everyone wants to sit there and diagnose it and pick it apart, saying if they do this, you just imagine this. You're asking an organization that can't get something right from the very beginning. You're asking them that instead of saying, okay, if we're going to be wrong, we're just going to be wrong about everything, but we're going to start completely over. That's what I would want them to do. But you're asking them who can't get it right to diagnose what's going wrong with, it's like that dude standing in front of that cabinet with all of those wires hanging everywhere and he's got his hands on his hip. That's what it seems like to me you're asking the Jacksonville Jaguars brass to do. It's easy for me to say, hey, man, y'all just let everybody go, start all over. Maybe it's like playing roulette now. Maybe you get it right and maybe you get it wrong. But what you're not going to do is sit here and see it messed up, and I'm going to get you, the person that doesn't know what you're doing to grab a screwdriver and some pliers and take this whole thing apart and pull all those wires. Now, diagnose it and put it back together. You're asking people that can't do their job really well to do the hardest version of that job when you do that. It hasn't worked so far. What makes y'all think it's going to work? That's a good question. We'll try to answer that in segment number 3 here on Locked On Jaguars. Today's show is sponsored and brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the rest of the NFL action this season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, segment 3 here on Locked On Jaguars, where's your team every day, talking about this apathy. I think that's the correct word that has been, that I think it's kind of taken over this team. That's why I'm going to look up the definition of apathy to make sure that I'm applying it. Lack of interest, enthusiasm, or concern. Yep, that pretty much is where it is for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And that's why everybody just wants to see progress. I hear fans they just want to beat the Titans. They just want to win these games. I'm not even mad at people. I never tell people how they should be fanning or how they should be feeling. Even when those people, some of the people that try to tell everybody else how to fan and feel. But I'm not going to do that because it's just I've never become what I despise. But and I don't despise the people. I'm just the action sometimes just gets on my nerves a little bit. But you can't help how you feel. People that pay their money to travel and go to games and tailgate. They want a little bit of gratification for that, and I ain't mad at it. I want a lot of gratification for that effort, though. 20 some odd years of buying tickets and celebrating and wearing these colors for this team and being there for this team. I want more for them. And that's why I'm so hard on the people in the organization. And some people don't like it, but I'm just going to keep it real and be real. I have to. Stop expecting people who can't do certain things to do them. Picking a GM is a crapshoot if you don't know what you're looking for. I'd rather you do that than let a GM continue to be in the job and then leave it up to him to figure out what's wrong with a problem that he probably had a whole bunch to do with creating. That's the definition of insanity, in my opinion. You take your car to a mechanic shop and it works okay, but it doesn't work like it's supposed to. You taking it back to the same person? Maybe once because you already paid him and it's guaranteed. But if he continues to screw it up, when you take it somewhere else, and then if they figure out what the real problem is, you go get your money back from the other person if you try to. And that's, you can't get your money back from these people. But my thing is it is not personal. It's not personal. It's just that there comes a point where you have to go, it's just not working. They do it all day, man, when they cut people and they trade people. They do it all day when they draft people to replace other people. So I don't know why anybody gets all upset when you're doing it with what they have going on. This is the number. After 14 weeks, a team that we all thought was going to win the championship is 3-11. And they were dependent on another Hail Mary by themselves to win 6 straight games. And then hopefully Houston could lose at least 2 games. And then Trevor got hit and got hurt. I'm not going to allow people to use excuses when it comes to this team. I'm not going to let anybody use injuries. If you want to look at injuries and how it affects the team and their mentality, I want you to go look at Detroit. Go see how pissed Dan Campbell is today because they lost 48-42 against one of the best teams in the league. And oh, by the way, they lost 2 other players yesterday, probably through 2 real good starters on their defense. And they've already lost like 31 dudes on that defense. Go ask him if there's some kind of consolation with the fact that they're playing with the third string defensive players in some of these situations. They're literally missing 4 defensive linemen, 3 linebackers, and like 4 DBs. That's like an entire depth chart. But they're not sitting here talking about woe is me, the progress, and doing a nice job. And Doug isn't supposed to be saying anything different. I want to reiterate that. But the fact that that's all we have to talk about with 4 games left in the season or 3 games left in the season is the sad point. All we can do is look for silver lining. A couple of plays, even in losses, just think about it. Oh, I came on the show yesterday. I said, okay, everybody said I was too negative last week. And granted, I'm not a jukebox where I let you put a coin in my back and I do what it is you want me to do or say what you want me to say. But I am understanding of this fan base that, hey, man, what's the positive from today? Well, the positive is that you had 2 players. One of them, Brian Thomas Jr., is the absolute truth. Here's a question. And this is, I thought about this morning. If you'd have came up and told me at the beginning of the year with the expectations that the Jacksonville Jaguars have, that Brian Thomas Jr. would be not only the best receiver out of this draft class, but he'd break a Jaguars record for touchdowns. He'd have 1,000 yards this year. He'd be one of the most explosive players in the league and would be already considered a top 8 to 10-ish wide receiver. If I told you that was going to happen and that the offensive line stayed healthy, because remember last year in the offseason, the thing is the offensive line just hadn't played together. So for the most part, they've all played together with the exception of, a game 2 here or there. And for the most part, Brian Thomas Jr. is going to be every single thing that I just said he is. What do you think the Jaguars record was going to be? Everybody thought that they had a chance to go to the Super Bowl without even knowing that. But if I'd have told you on draft night that dude's going to get 1,000 yards, be a top 10 receiver in the NFL, maybe offensive rookie of the year, what would that mean for you? You can't tell me you'd have thought this team would be 3-11. In fact, without all of that, you didn't think this team would be 3-11. And with what I just said, knowing what you were bringing back, you really wouldn't have thought that this team was going to be 3-11 after 14 weeks. So that's why I'm not going to act like they're not 3-11. I'm going to say no matter what they say about somebody's progress, no matter what I get on here and make a podcast about somebody's progress or how this guy is promising and that guy is promising, that does not mean that that is a substitution for the fact that they're 3-11. It doesn't mean that moving in the right direction. No, it doesn't. Just because those dudes are putting out and putting up numbers and being able to play competently and playing the way you thought they would play. If they were winning, that's one thing, but they're playing and doing things the way you thought that you were hoping that they would, and they're still losing. Therefore, you don't get no credit from me for that. They get individual credit, but the team doesn't, and the person who built the team doesn't, and the coaching staff doesn't. I just try to exercise it in my mind. I put this coaching staff in a room where they can't touch each other with the coaches that got fired last year. What would that conversation be like? Would it be like, told you it wasn't us? Would it be like, you knew it wasn't us? Or would it be like looking at Ryan Nielsen and say, gave you the same stuff they gave us and look what happened? Just wonder what that conversation is going to be like. I wonder if I was a fly on the wall, what the coaches think about the way that this team is constructed. I wonder if I was a fly on the wall, how Trent Baalke would be feeling about Doug Peterson and the coaching staff. Now, imagine those 2 flies in those 2 different rooms get together and they somehow sneak into Shad Khan's office and they can talk to him. Whatever they tell him, I hope they tell him the absolute truth so Shad knows something has to give. You don't have to give me nothing but your attention for about 30 minutes a day, and I'll give you a Locked On Jaguars podcast, and you can make sure you tap in every single day. Find me also on the Locked On NFL show every day in the afternoon. I do the PM version, and Tyler Rowland, the Madman, does the morning version. Double dose of NFL action with the use of local experts that helps you understand everything about the National Football League. All right, man, we'll talk about it tomorrow. See if there's any news on the horizon for the Jacksonville Jaguars. We'll keep you abreast of it. Until then, you guys take care and enjoy your day.